Every day, millions ride the subway, but one boy vanished between two stations. And decades later, what workers found behind a sealed brick wall changed everything. On a rainy October evening in 1989, 13-year-old Daniel Whitaker boarded the downtown-bound R train from Lexington Avenue after leaving his school's chess club meeting. He wore a red windbreaker, blue jeans, and a backpack with a single patch sewn into the back. A smiling cartoon astronaut holding a chessboard. The train left the station at exactly 5:41 p.m. Surveillance footage, though grainy and limited, confirmed his presence in the last car of the train. But by the time it pulled into Canal Street, just 4 stops later, Daniel was gone. No one remembered seeing him exit. No witnesses, no commotion, no emergency alert. He simply ceased to exist somewhere, between Lexington and Canal. At first, the police assumed he had run away, a fight at school, a troubled home, a teenage impulse. But Daniel was a quiet, intelligent boy with no history of behavioral issues. His mother, Teresa Whitaker, a nurse working double shifts at Mount Sinai, insisted her son had no reason to disappear. Danny was careful, she told the news that week, tears soaking her cheeks. He wasn't the kind to sneak off. He called me every afternoon like clockwork. And that evening, she waited by the phone, but it never rang. Investigators reviewed station footage and interviewed passengers, operators, and maintenance staff. Nothing. No sightings, no disturbances, no signs of foul play. The city was busy that week with mayoral debates and transit union protests. Daniel's story barely made the evening news. Within a month, interest waned. The file was stamped with a faded red label, unresolved. But Teresa never stopped searching. She taped flyers to every subway pillar she could find. She left messages on community boards, pleaded with morning radio hosts, and organized candlelight vigils. Other families of missing children joined her in solidarity. But time, like the tunnels under Manhattan, swallowed hope whole. Years passed, then decades, and somewhere beneath the city, behind brick and concrete, the secrets stayed buried until the wall broke. It began in the spring of 2023, when the MTA greenlit a major renovation of the lower platform at the abandoned Worth Street station, a place closed to the public since 1962. The expansion aimed to relieve congestion on the 6th line and reintroduce forgotten infrastructure into modern use. Most assumed the project would be routine, demolition, electrical rewiring, new tile work. But on April 3rd, a routine wall inspection took an unexpected turn. Martin Delaney, a third-generation transit worker, noticed a subtle discoloration in the wall between 2 rusted maintenance doors. The bricks were oddly new compared to the rest of the century-old architecture. He tapped it with his flashlight. It sounded hollow. After notifying his foreman, the team removed a small section of the wall, expecting a crawl space or piping cavity. What they uncovered instead stopped them cold. A room, a man-made cavity roughly 8 feet wide and 10 feet deep, sealed in on all sides except for the narrow access hidden behind the bricks. Inside were rusted shelves, rotting newspaper stacks, and a metal cot covered in a decayed blanket. But what drew immediate attention was what lay in the center: a child's backpack. Faded, torn, but unmistakable. On its back, still intact despite time and rot, was the smiling cartoon astronaut holding a chessboard. News broke within 24 hours. DNA analysis was expedited. The New York Police Department, alongside the FBI, reopened the Whitaker case. Forensics confirmed that the bag and several other personal items in the room belonged to Daniel, but the discovery only deepened the mystery. Who had built the room? How did Daniel end up there? And most disturbingly, what happened to him inside? That dark, silent tomb. As demolition halted and investigation began, one thing became clear. The city had forgotten, but the subway hadn't. And now, piece by piece, the story was forcing its way back into the light. By the time NYPD detectives Arrived at Worth Street, the renovation crew had cordoned off the area with orange barricades and hazard tape. Forensics officers entered the sealed room with respirators and headlamps, careful not to disturb the scene. Dust hung thick in the air. Every item was catalogued, photographed, and then removed with gloved precision. But nothing could prepare them for the contents found inside a rusted metal box beneath the cot. Inside were 5 Polaroid photographs, all of Daniel. One showed him sitting on the edge of the cot, his expression unreadable. Another showed him writing in a notebook. A third showed a tray of food beside him, cold canned beans and a bottle of water. But the last 2 were different. In one, he was asleep, curled under the thin blanket. In the other, he was staring directly at the camera, eyes wide, as if startled by whoever had taken the photo. There were no fingerprints on the box, no prints on the Polaroids. Time had erased most evidence. Still, the implications were clear. Daniel had been kept here. For how long, no one could yet say. Teresa was notified immediately. She arrived at the station flanked by 2 officers and a grief counselor. At 68, she walked slowly but with quiet determination. When they showed her the backpack, she collapsed to her knees. "That's his," she whispered. "That's my son's." The photos were kept from her, deemed too disturbing. But the media wasn't as cautious. Within hours, the Polaroids leaked to an online forum dedicated to unsolved cases. Users speculated wildly. Was Daniel kidnapped? Did he escape and disappear again? Was the room part of a forgotten Cold War bunker or something worse? Theories flooded in, but 2 stood out. The first came from a former MTA engineer named Carl Russo, who claimed the room matched a schematic from a decommissioned urban survival shelter built during the late 50s. These were experimental, self-contained modules, meant to provide short-term refuge during nuclear emergencies. Most were removed. Some, he insisted, had simply been sealed and forgotten. The second theory came from deeper underground. A literal urban explorer who had mapped many of Manhattan's abandoned subway lines. Using his own footage, he revealed a hidden service route leading from Worth Street to an old ventilation shaft connected to a long-abandoned private platform beneath a defunct luxury hotel. Both leads hinted at the same thing. Daniel didn't vanish into thin air. He had been hidden. Whether he was placed there or wandered in and became trapped remained the central question, but answers were finally surfacing. When detectives examined the notebook found in the photo, they uncovered the first undeniable trace of Daniel's voice. Scrawled in childish handwriting on the first page were the words, "If someone finds this, my name is Daniel Whitaker. Please tell my mum I didn't run away. I was taken." 2 days after the discovery of Daniel's hidden room, NYPD detective Iris Talbot met with urban explorer Ray Navarro in a dimly lit storage unit in Queens. Ray, in his late 30s, wore a black hoodie and carried a tablet loaded with years' worth of underground footage. He was jittery, not from fear, but from excitement. "You're looking at Worth Street, right? I've got a route that might interest you." He pulled up grainy night vision footage. The screen showed a narrow service passage branching from the Worth Street tunnel. A low, rusted grate blocked the entrance to a crawl space marked HVAC 14. Behind it, Ray whispered to the camera, "Ventilation shaft, sealed since the 60s, but the air's not stale. Someone's opened this recently." Talbot leaned in. "Show me where it leads." Ray scrubbed forward. The footage turned shaky as he crawled through the shaft. The narrow space opened into a circular chamber filled with dusty machinery and collapsed ductwork. But at the center was something out of place. A modern folding chair, a plastic water bottle, and a flashlight with a fresh battery. "This was just 6 months ago," Ray said. "No one's supposed to be here." Investigators immediately sealed off the route. A team of crime scene technicians in hazmat gear entered HVAC 14. What they found was beyond explanation. Behind, one of the fallen ducts was a tunnel, narrow, hand-dug, reinforced with scavenged steel rods. It led to another room. This one was newer, clean. wired with low-voltage LED lighting. In the corner was a portable generator, half-empty gas canisters, a plastic cooler with expired protein shakes, and several changes of adult-sized clothes. But what stunned the team most was a corkboard pinned with yellowing clippings, each one about Daniel Whitaker's disappearance, photos of Teresa Whitaker, maps of the MTA system, a sketch of Worth Street Station. Someone had been watching. Detective Talbot ordered a full sweep of the chamber. DNA was collected from everything: tools, water bottles, clothing, even strands of hair caught in the zipper of a sleeping bag. The evidence was sent to the lab with a rush order. 3 days later, the results arrived. The hair matched Daniel Whitaker, but it wasn't from 1989. It was less than 5 years old. Talbot stared at the report. He was alive. Recently. If Daniel had lived into adulthood, where was he now? And who had been keeping him? Back at the station, Talbot reviewed the timeline. Daniel disappeared in 1989. The room behind the wall had clearly been abandoned for decades, but HVAC 14 was active recently. That meant Daniel escaped, or was moved. She turned her attention to the second mystery. Who had sealed the first room, and why? Building permits from the late 1980s showed one name repeated often in the renovation of older MTA infrastructure: Ewan Maris, an engineer who supervised repairs across the Lower Manhattan lines from 1987 to 1991. His name showed up on a permit request to reinforce lateral access zone in Worth Street. Talbot found his current address in upstate New York. She made the drive the next morning. Ewan Maris, now 78, lived in a cottage outside Albany. When she introduced herself and asked about Worth Street, his expression changed. "That project was cursed," he muttered. "Everyone said the blueprints were wrong. We kept finding things that weren't supposed to be there." "Like what?" "A sealed room. No door, no label. Just bricks. I told the foreman it wasn't on any schematic. He told us to ignore it. Said we had quotas." "Who was the foreman?" Maris hesitated. "Henry Dobbins." The name meant nothing to Talbot, but a background check revealed that Dobbins had died in 2006. His son, however, Luke Dobbins, still lived in the city and worked in the MTA. Talbot felt a chill. The investigation had just taken a turn. Detective Iris Talbot arrived at the MTA's personnel office in downtown Brooklyn the following morning. She scanned the employee registry and located the entry. Luke Dobbins, senior maintenance engineer, assigned to line inspections along the 4, 5, and 6 routes, just blocks from the Worth Street site. She requested a formal interview. Luke agreed, perhaps too easily. They met in a neutral space, a small NYPD field office near the Brooklyn Bridge. Luke, in his late 40s, wore his MTA-issued jacket zipped high despite the warm spring morning. His hands, rough and grease-stained, drummed nervously on the table. "I was expecting this," he said before Talbot even sat down. "Because of your father?" she asked. Luke nodded. "He talked about the Worth Street project, said something wasn't right, that they were told to patch a section that didn't exist in the blueprints." "You said patch. You mean seal?" Luke looked away. "He came home that night shaking, said there was something back there, a voice. He told me, 'There's a kid in there.' But when he told his supervisor, they shut him down. Told him if he spoke up again, he'd lose his pension." Talbot leaned forward. "So your father helped seal Daniel Whitaker in?" "I don't think he knew what was happening. Not really. He thought maybe he imagined the voice. There were no missing persons reports near that site, at least none he knew of. But after that job, he refused to work underground again." Talbot opened a folder and slid over the photo of the ventilation shaft room. "Does this look familiar?" Luke studied it. "That's HVAC 14. I was down there 2 years ago. We'd had reports of heat anomalies, ventilation moving when the system was off. I went in alone. And there was someone living there. I didn't see him, But I found signs. Food wrappers, candles, a sketchbook. I reported it. To whom? My supervisor. Guy named Russo. He told me not to worry, said it was probably a homeless squatter. Did you believe him? Luke paused. No, because I went back the next week, and it was clean. Completely. Scrubbed. Like someone was erasing any trace. Talbot's voice dropped. Do you think your father was covering for someone? I think he was scared, Luke replied, and ashamed. I think someone knew about that room. Maybe even before. Daniel got trapped there. Talbot left the interview with more questions than answers. One name stuck in her mind, Russo. She pulled the internal directory. Carl Russo, maintenance division supervisor. The same name from the online forum. The supposed whistleblower. She ran a search. No one by that name was currently employed. Carl Russo had died in 2001. So who had posted that forum video? The user account linked back to an encrypted proxy. But after a long night working with the NYPD cyber team, they traced the account to a private IP, registered to an apartment in Harlem, under the name Daniel M. Whitaker. Detective Talbot stood outside the door of apartment 4B, an aging walk-up on Frederick Douglass Boulevard. A faded "Do Not Disturb" sign dangled from the handle. Her partner, Detective Sean Ortega, stood beside her, nodding once as she knocked. No answer. She knocked. Again. NYPD, Mr. Whitaker, we need to speak with you. From inside, a shuffling, then silence. Just as Ortega reached for his tools, the lock clicked. The door opened a sliver. Behind it stood a man in his early 40s, unshaven, eyes bloodshot. His build was thin, but his gaze was sharp, alert. Yes, he said, voice hoarse. I know who you're looking for. I'm him. Daniel Whitaker. Alive Talbot and Ortega exchanged glances. May we come in? Daniel hesitated, then opened the door wider. The apartment was Spartan. Books, maps, stacks of journals, and a corkboard covered in newspaper clippings about his own disappearance. Talbot stepped inside slowly. Mr. Whitaker, are you aware your name is still listed among the missing? I never intended to be found, Daniel replied, settling into a worn armchair. But I knew one day someone would come. That wall, they were never going to keep it sealed forever. Ortega remained standing. You posted under the name Carl Russo on an online forum. Why? Because I couldn't use my real name. I needed a ghost. Someone who could shout without being traced. Russo was the last man I saw before they sealed me in. Talbot pulled a small recorder from her jacket. Can you tell us what happened to you? Daniel exhaled deeply. I was taken from the train. Not by force. I followed someone. He told me my mother had sent him. Said there was an emergency. I didn't know any better. I was 13. He looked past them, lost in memory. They brought me underground, locked me in that room. For weeks, maybe months. I stopped keeping track. There was a man, middle-aged, clean-shaven, always in a uniform. He said they were trying to protect me, that the world was too dangerous. Did he ever give you a name? Talbot asked. Daniel nodded. He said to call him Henry, but one night he didn't come back. Days passed, then weeks. I thought I would die there. I started digging, found a way out through an air duct. He gestured to his journal. I lived in the system for years, underground, in shadows. I stole food, learned the tunnels, found rooms no one remembered. And when I was strong enough, I watched. Watched what? Everyone. My mother, the investigators, the people who lied. I wanted to know who they were, why they did it. Talbot sat down across from him. Why didn't you come forward? Daniel's voice lowered. Because nothing changed. The same people were still there. The system protected them. I couldn't fight them. Not back then. But you can now, she said. You can testify. Daniel looked at her. For the first time showing fear. "They'll come for me." "We'll protect you," Ortega said. "You're not alone anymore." Daniel opened a drawer and handed them a stack of papers. "Then start here. These are the names. Everyone who helped cover it up. It wasn't just one man. It was a network." Talbot flipped through the papers, internal memos, handwritten notes, schematics. It was a blueprint of conspiracy. "This," she said, "changes everything." Detective Iris Talbot and Sean Ortega returned to the precinct with Daniel Whitaker's dossier. Dozens of pages naming engineers, foremen, transit supervisors, and at least one NYPD officer. Each document was cross-referenced, time-stamped, and painfully detailed. Captain Ramirez called in a special task force. They met late into the night, cross-examining the documents with transit authority records. What emerged was staggering. A 35-year pattern of budget reroutes, falsified tunnel maintenance records, and a private contract system designed to evade oversight. "These weren't random acts," Ramirez said. "This was a structure." Daniel sat in a quiet room, sketching on yellow notepads as if time had no meaning. Talbot entered with a single photo. "Do you recognize this man?" Daniel looked. "That's him, the one who took me from the train. Henry." The photo showed Henry Polanski, former MTA subdirector, declared dead in 1991. But another file contradicted that. A man with identical biometric markers had been arrested in Florida in 2003 under the alias Alan Pierce. What if Henry never died? Ortega asked. "Then he's still out there," Talbot replied. They placed the photo on a whiteboard already dotted with names. A new section was added, possibly active. Each name Daniel had written was checked against current databases. Some were dead, others retired. But 6 were still working for the city. 1, a current deputy commissioner. Talbot stared at the board. "They thought this would never resurface," Daniel stepped in. "Because they never expected the boy to live." Later that night, the NYPD Internal Affairs launched sealed subpoenas. Talbot and Ortega were assigned protective detail for Daniel. A safe house was prepared, but Daniel insisted on one thing: a return visit to Worth Street. "I need to see it," he said. "For closure." At 3 a.m., escorted by officers, Daniel descended into the long-abandoned station. Dust thick on the rails, silence like a tomb. He walked slowly to the bricked-over wall, the place that had been his world for months. He placed his hand on it. "I thought I'd die here." Talbot stood beside him. "You didn't." Behind them, Ortega's radio crackled. "Unit 7, we've lost contact with the safe house. Unknown breach. Officers down." Talbot turned to Daniel. "They're coming." The team rushed out of the Worth Street station, sirens echoing through the underground as Talbot barked into her radio. "All units converge on the safe house. Officer down call confirmed." By the time they arrived, the street was flooded with red and blue. One squad car had been rammed off the curb, its front end crushed. The safe house door was open, splintered. Inside, chaos, furniture overturned, blood smears on the floor, no sign of Daniel. Ortega crouched beside a wounded officer. "Who did this?" The officer, barely conscious, rasped, "2 men, black van, tactical gear, not city issue." Daniel had been taken. Talbot stared at the surveillance monitor. All feed had been looped. Someone had fed them old footage. It was professional, military grade. "Someone's trying to erase him again," she said grimly. The task force gathered at HQ within the hour. A hit team this organized, this fast. It meant the network Daniel exposed still had loyalists and resources. One of Daniel's documents had included a shell company, Lanford Holdings, a business front used to route MTA funds, registered to a midtown high-rise. By morning, Talbot and Ortega had obtained a warrant. They raided Lanford's 29th floor office. Empty, only a single chair and a tablet left open on the desk. On screen, a paused video. Daniel, restrained in a van, speaking directly to the camera. "If you're seeing this," he said, voice calm, "they didn't just want me quiet. They wanted what I know buried forever. But they're too late." Looked off camera. "I uploaded everything to 6 servers. If anything happens to me, the world will see it." A voice, distorted, interrupted. "End it!" The video cut out. Talbot turned to Ortega. "They think this ends with him, but it won't." A new priority bulletin went out citywide. Daniel Whitaker was officially upgraded from victim to national witness. The FBI joined the investigation, and Talbot made a quiet call to an old friend in cybercrime. "We need to find those servers." Detective Talbot's contact in cybercrime, Malik Yoon, had seen digital ghosts before, but nothing like this. Sitting in the bureau's cyber lab, he pulled up a secured laptop and decrypted Daniel's file drop locations. "Each upload leads to a dead man switch server," Malik explained. "Encrypted behind rotating proxies, cloud relays, even dark web tunnels." "Can you find them?" Talbot asked. Malik smiled. "I can find anything." Within hours they had a lead. One of the servers was pinging from a storage node hidden in a game developer's beta cloud, disguised as level design assets. Another, hosted through a medical university's archive under mislabeled MRI data. Daniel had been clever. Meanwhile, the FBI traced the van's last GPS trail, before it went dark near the Queens industrial docks. A warehouse camera caught a brief glimpse. The van pulling into an abandoned textile facility. Then nothing. Talbot, Ortega, and a tactical team stormed the site. The warehouse was quiet. Too quiet. Inside, they found a makeshift holding cell, chains bolted to the floor, a stained mattress. But no Daniel. What they did find was a wall lined with photographs of Talbot, Ortega, Malik, even Captain Ramirez. Surveillance shots, some taken just days ago. They were all being watched. "We've poked the nest," Ortega muttered. Malik called in with urgency. "Someone's trying to breach the servers now. They've found at least 2. If we don't move fast, all 6 are gone." Talbot knew what that meant. "Then we need to leak the truth. Ourselves." Using a federal warrant, they contacted an investigative journalist with ProPublica. Hours later, the first parts of Daniel's files, audio recordings, internal MTA emails, whistleblower transcripts, were released to the press. By nightfall, news tickers across the country carried the headline, "Exclusive, NYC Transit System, tied to 30-year cover-up of missing boy." The public outrage was immediate. Protesters surrounded City Hall. Social media erupted. The governor demanded answers, and somewhere, in a dark room, Daniel watched the chaos unfold on a grainy TV. He smiled. The fallout from Daniel's leak was unprecedented. City officials scrambled to contain the narrative, but the damage was done. Protests shut down major transit hubs. Lawsuits were filed. The mayor called for a full independent inquiry. In a packed federal courtroom in downtown Manhattan, the United States versus New York City Transit Authority opened with cameras flashing and reporters crowding the sidewalks. At the heart of the prosecution, a boy who had once disappeared into the tunnels of the city now returned as a man holding all its darkest secrets. Daniel, still recovering from captivity, was placed under federal protection. But his testimony was crucial. His identity was withheld publicly, his voice modulated during his video deposition, yet the words carried weight. "I was held in a room beneath Worth Street," his recorded voice said. "My captors were not strangers. They were employees, officials, men who took an oath to serve." As the trial unfolded, more bombshells dropped. Internal communications from 1987 showing the MTA knew of an unauthorized chamber beneath Worth Street. A document signed by 3 senior city engineers approving the construction of a concealed compartment in violation of safety codes. Bank records showing payments to an offshore account linked to Henry Polanski, who was still alive, living under an alias in Venezuela. Ortega tracked him down with Interpol's help. He was detained during a layover in Lisbon. In court, witnesses testified to cover-ups, destroyed evidence, coerced silence. The jury listened, stunned, as Talbot recounted the modern investigation, the threats, the attempted erasure of Daniel again. Outside, murals of Daniel's childhood photo began appearing across the boroughs with one word below it. Remember, the trial lasted 8 weeks. Verdict: guilty. Several top MTA executives, 2 former NYPD officers, and 3 contractors were convicted of conspiracy, obstruction, and unlawful imprisonment. Henry Polanski faced additional charges, including abduction and torture. Daniel declined to speak at sentencing, but before leaving the courtroom, he handed Talbot a handwritten note. It read, "Thank you for finding me. Now let's find the others." Winter arrived early in New York City. Cold rain slicked the streets and rooftops glistened with frost. The media frenzy around the transit trial had barely calmed, but Talbot knew the real work was just beginning. Daniel's note still haunted her. Let's find the others. The FBI created a sub-task force, Project Reclaim, dedicated to finding additional victims of the hidden transit chambers. Names surfaced. Boys and girls reported missing between 1985 and 2001. Cases long cold. Similar patterns, late trains, no witnesses, faulty station cameras. Malik Yoon uncovered more files embedded in Daniel's server structure. Logs dated well past his abduction. They detailed operational phases, reference numbers, even construction orders. One document read, Site 12 reassignment. Subject moved to Pennsylvania sector. Handling transferred to central administration. Another. Incident. Subject 5 escape attempt. Recovered. Sedated. These weren't isolated kidnappings. They were part of a program. Daniel, now under psychological care, began drawing again. Floor plans, door codes, sounds he remembered. One drawing showed a giant rusted door with the phrase etched above it, "Forgotten, not gone." Using Daniel's maps and metadata, a joint task force tracked coordinates to rural Pennsylvania. Beneath a decommissioned rail depot outside Harrisburg, they discovered a sealed vault, concrete, layered steel, powered by an off-grid generator. They breached it. Inside, 8 rooms, cells, blanketed in darkness and silence, 4 of them empty. 4. Not survivors. A woman in her 30s who had disappeared in 1994. A man who hadn't seen sunlight since 1988. 2 boys, barely teens, malnourished but alive. Each had been listed as runaways or presumed dead. Their first words echoed Daniel's. They told us the world forgot. The press dubbed it the underground orphanage. Congress opened hearings. Federal probes unraveled deeper state level, contracts tied to transit security and special project budgets. The numbers were staggering, and in a final twist, hidden inside a steel box found in one of the rooms, a videotape labeled Phase 0. Test subject. D.W. Talbot inserted the tape into an archival player back at HQ. The footage flickered, grainy and distorted. A child sat alone in a stark room, staring at the camera. It was Daniel. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. A voice replied, cold and scientific. "To see if you can forget." The footage of young Daniel played again and again in the minds of the task force. "To see if you can forget," the voice had said. But now it wasn't Daniel who needed reminding. It was the public. Malik began decoding the metadata embedded in the analog recording. Layered beneath the magnetic hum were time codes, facility IDs, and biometric tags. One stood out, Facility A3, Phase 0, initiation, using satellite imaging and long-defunct transit schematics. Talbot and Ortega traced Facility A3 to an abandoned psychiatric hospital in upstate New York, sealed after a fire in 1983. But the building still drew power. The raid was swift. Inside, no patients, but laboratories preserved. Filing cabinets stuffed with names, ages, psychological profiles. A wall of Polaroids with a title above them. Candidates who didn't forget, and in the middle of the facility, a sealed metal door marked with one word. Zero. Talbot, Ortega, and a federal hazmat team opened it. Inside was a room identical to the one from the tape. Clean, cold, empty, except for a chair and a projector. On the chair, a small envelope. Talbot opened it. Inside, a note, handwritten. "Welcome back, Daniel." As they searched further, a hidden chamber revealed another cache of tapes, each labeled with subject initials and dates going back to 1979. There were hundreds. Phase 0 was the prototype, Malik realized. They tested memory suppression, sensory control, long-term isolation. Daniel wasn't the first. He was just the one who survived long enough to be seen. Talbot whispered, and remembered. The case had transformed from a local scandal to a global reckoning. News of Phase 0 spread like wildfire. International human rights groups called for war crimes investigations. DNA pulled from the facility matched people listed as missing worldwide. And Daniel, he watched from afar. Still healing, still remembering, but not alone. He opened a blank notebook and began to write. The notebook Daniel opened became more than a personal journal. It became a blueprint. His memories had returned not just as flashes, but as structure, hierarchy, systems. He wasn't just a survivor. He had been groomed, trained. Across multiple tapes found in Facility A3, Daniel's voice returned as the interviewer, not the subject. Older footage, dated 2001. His voice calm, emotionless. Test parameters holding. Subject 17 retains 42% long-term memory function, adjusting sensory dosage accordingly. Talbot and Malik watched, horrified. Daniel hadn't only been a prisoner, he had become part of the system. Briefly, unknowingly perhaps, but clearly. Complicit. Was this part of Phase 0? Talbot asked aloud. No, Malik said. This was something deeper. The deeper they dug, the more references they found to a figure known only as the architect, an alias attached to funding memos, experimental frameworks, internal communications. All data led to one location, an estate in northern Maine, officially listed as a private nature retreat. Privately, it housed a bunker. Inside the estate, Talbot and Ortega found more than servers. They found blueprints of transit systems worldwide, not just New York. Marked in red were tunnels from London to Berlin to Osaka. This wasn't a city conspiracy. It was global, and at the center of the room, photographs of children, time-stamped and logged, some recent, and at the back wall, a portrait. Daniel, but not as a boy, as a young man, in uniform. A nameplate beneath it read, Architect, Whitaker. Daniel had once helped design the system that imprisoned him. Daniel stared at the portrait bearing his name. He didn't remember this version of himself, the man in uniform, the architect. But the evidence was irrefutable. He had been used, rewritten, and now he had to unwrite everything they built through him. Talbot suggested a full blackout operation, quiet and strategic. They couldn't risk spooking the remaining members of the network. Ortega disagreed. This is global. We go loud, or we let it spread again. Malik intercepted communications from a subdomain linked to the estate's server. Someone was already cleaning house, deleting files, erasing locations. Daniel proposed a compromise, a series of coordinated leaks, each revealing one thread of the operation, forcing the public to demand action before the conspirators could disappear again. The first leak, a video, the architect's face, distorted by age and time, interrogating a child. Then another clip, one of the recovered survivors describing the isolation chambers. Then documents, names, fund transfers, architectural designs. They called the campaign Undoing. Within days, media channels exploded. Interpol raids swept facilities in 8 countries. Whistleblowers emerged. Hidden chambers were uncovered beneath rail systems in Seoul, Cape Town, Buenos Aires. But with every step forward, resistance grew. A private security firm, known only as Argus, launched cyber attacks on the task force. One agent was killed in Prague. Another disappeared in Oslo. Daniel knew the backlash was personal. They weren't just erasing the evidence. They were coming for him. He prepared. A bunker beneath a burned-out school in Brooklyn became his new base. Talbot reinforced protection detail. Ortega coordinated international liaisons. Malik built encrypted relays that updated evidence archives every 12 hours. If they lost contact with Daniel, the world would still receive the next file dump. But Daniel wanted more than exposure. He wanted to find the last piece, the mother terminal, the master node that connected the global chambers. It was referenced in only one document, no coordinates, just a phrase. Beneath the city that never wakes. Daniel traced every lead he had and he found it. The phrase haunted Daniel. Beneath the city that never wakes. He obsessed over it, tracing historical blueprints, declassified Cold War infrastructure maps, even subway folklore forums. One location appeared across multiple unrelated data points. A dead zone under Manhattan's original terminal grid, abandoned since the 1940s and sealed after a structural collapse. But satellite scans showed a power source still active. Accessing the site required city clearance, but Daniel bypassed it with forged credentials and Malik's rerouted municipal access codes. At 2:13 a.m., they entered a forgotten maintenance tunnel through a rusted hatch beneath an old dry cleaner. The path twisted downward for nearly a mile. They reached a sublevel no one had visited in over 70 years. The air was stale, silent, except for one thing, an intermittent humming noise, mechanical and low, like breath from a sleeping beast. Daniel and Ortega followed it. They found the mother terminal embedded in bedrock, not a supercomputer in the traditional sense, but a living archive. Miles of magnetic reels, fiber circuits pulsing under clear panels, and a throne-like chair in the center. Above it, a display flickered to life. Architect Access confirmed the system recognized Daniel. It began to speak. You were meant to return. Daniel froze. The voice wasn't synthetic. It was his own, recorded and modulated. A younger version. Welcome back. Initiating final phase. Erase. The countdown began. 72 hours until the entire archive would self-delete. Daniel tried to abort, but his override commands failed. The system didn't respond to current day Daniel. Only to the architect. Malik, connected remotely, found one shot. Rewrite Daniel's biometric signature to match his past version. Dangerous, potentially lethal. Your mind could fry, Malik warned. This isn't just code. It's identity. Daniel accepted. We don't erase truth. Not anymore. They wired him in. Pain lanced through Daniel's spine as the system calibrated. His memories flooded in reverse. His voice echoing. From terminals, his eyes on dozens of screens. He remembered everything. Phase 0. The conditioning. The betrayals. The moment he agreed to help design the chambers, believing it was for protection, not disappearance. He remembered the girl who vanished first. He remembered her name, and with that name, the system stopped. Candidate record match. Found. The system paused the countdown. Daniel, now fully synchronized, commanded the archive to unlock. Thousands of digital profiles spilled open. Victims, survivors, documents, maps, logs. Daniel didn't stop. He uploaded it all, to every major server, every outlet, encrypted with a final message. Remember us. Sirens echoed from above. Ortega shouted, "They're here!" Argus operatives breached the tunnel. Gunfire lit the darkness. Daniel stayed, seated. I'm not running again. His last act was to transmit the full data set to an open, untraceable network. Just as Argus reached the terminal chamber, the system overloaded, imploding in a white-hot burst of light. Ortega escaped. Daniel didn't. But the world now knew. News of the exposure reverberated like thunder across the globe. Networks scrambled to verify the data dump. Fact-checkers confirmed it wasn't just real, it was vast. Names, faces, coordinated silence. And at the center, the man they called the architect. Daniel's death was not confirmed, but presumed. Ortega swore he saw him vanish in the white burst, but no body was recovered. Some said he'd been vaporized. Others claimed he survived. The public demanded trials. Nations convened emergency summits. Non-profits and journalists combed through the archive. Protests exploded in over 50 cities. Remember Us became a rallying cry and a revolution. Malik was arrested, then released under public outcry. His testimony before the UN laid bare the history of the chambers, the black sites, and the original intent twisted by fear and power. Ortega continued Daniel's work. In his testimony, he held up Daniel's last words. "We don't erase truth." It became a Foundation's slogan, one dedicated to tracking hidden operations globally, but the system had its own contingency. Weeks later, 3 unrelated servers across different continents blinked to life. Each bore the seal of the mother terminal and initiated silent processes, not of erasure, but restoration, backup threads, survival caches. Daniel had anticipated this. He had hidden one last key within a fragment of code, in a subroutine tied to the name he'd spoken when the system paused. The name of the first girl, a name that, when decoded, pointed to a small orphanage in Minsk. And beneath that building, sealed in concrete and ash, was the original hard drive of the first chamber test site. Intact, recovered, archived, revealed. The reckoning wasn't just of truth, but of accountability, high profile. Resignations followed, some arrests, a few deaths under mysterious circumstances, but justice, slow and imperfect, had begun. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the upload, a memorial opened in Central Park. Thousands gathered beneath a sculpture inscribed with just 3 words. Remember the vanished, and beneath that, in a metal box welded to the base, was a copy of Daniel's final upload, encrypted and open to all.